There comes a specific point in human life when external success, personal achievements, social relationships, and everyday identity no longer satisfy the deeper hunger of our existence. Something subtle begins to shift deep within us. The questions that once remained dormant during our busy routines start surfacing with undeniable power. We begin to ask ourselves, who am I really? Why does psychological suffering persist, even when our external life conditions significantly improve? What remains true when everything I identify with begins to change? And is there something in me that does not change? These are not merely academic or philosophical questions to be discussed lightly. They arise from a place of deep existential urgency. The human journey usually begins with intense identification. We are born into a state of pure openness, but almost immediately, the process of social conditioning begins. A personal name is given, a language is learned, specific roles are assigned, beliefs are inherited, and psychological memory rapidly accumulates. Slowly, a structured identity forms, and that identity becomes the absolute center of our personal existence. We call this conditioned structure me. This personal self becomes the constant reference point through which all of our human experiences are interpreted. Pleasure strengthens it, pain threatens it, success validates it, and failure deeply wounds it. The mind spends an enormous amount of daily energy preserving and defending this psychological center, yet eventual suffering reveals something deeply unsettling. Even when our specific desires are completely fulfilled, a true sense of rest remains entirely elusive, and the mind continues its endless seeking. The mind continuously demands more security, more control, more certainty, and more recognition. The search appears endless because the conditioned self is fundamentally structured around a sense of incompleteness. Its natural movement is always toward a state of future becoming. This investigation explores awakening not as a rigid ideology, but as a direct exploration of that movement. Across these chapters, one central insight repeatedly appears. Awakening is not an escape from life. It is true freedom within life. The journey toward awakening rarely begins in states of comfort. More often, it begins in moments of profound disruption where a sacred collapse takes place. No one awakens from a sweet dream. It is often the nightmare that wakes the dreamer. Something fundamental collapses within our world. What once felt deeply meaningful suddenly loses its vitality, and what once motivated us no longer inspires our action. Outwardly, life may continue normally, but inwardly, a profound breaking occurs. This difficult phase is universally called the dark night of the soul. This dark night is not ordinary sadness. It is an existential collapse. The old identity weakens while the new has not yet emerged, leaving us suspended between different worlds. The mind experiences intense emptiness, confusion, spiritual dryness, meaninglessness, and disorientation. This phase feels brutal because the ego interprets this collapse as a total failure, but spiritually, something sacred is occurring as the false center weakens. The dark night dismantles our psychological certainty because awakening cannot occur while our identity remains fully invested in illusion. The dream of who we are must become unstable, and this is why suffering often becomes a fierce grace. Suffering exposes our illusions. As long as the dream remains sweet, awakening rarely becomes urgent. Comfort sustains our psychological hypnosis, whereas suffering interrupts it. The dark night strips away false supports, creating a sacred space where the deeper questions can arise. Once our rigid identity begins to weaken, a deeper inquiry naturally arises regarding the true nature of consciousness. Everything we know appears directly in consciousness. Thoughts appear in consciousness, emotions appear in consciousness, sensory perceptions appear in consciousness, and even our basic sense of self appears in consciousness. This observation is revolutionary because it suggests consciousness is prior to experience. It is not a product of experience, but the field in which experience appears. Ordinarily, consciousness appears tightly identified with the mind and the body. The external world feels solid, and our identity feels deeply personal. Yet closer inquiry reveals that all experience is mediated through awareness, and without awareness, no world can be known. This leads to a radical possibility. Consciousness may not be inside the world, but the world itself appears within consciousness. This realization shifts our identity from the changing contents of experience to that within which experience appears. One of the major confusions in spiritual inquiry arises when we attempt to apply absolute truth directly to relative functioning. The absolute reality is non-dual, where pure awareness has no separation. However, manifestation inherently requires differentiation. Without distinction, form cannot exist. Day and night, birth and death, pleasure and pain, creation and destruction are structural necessities of manifestation. Duality itself is not the problem. Unconscious identification within duality is. The world functions through polarity, requiring boundaries, social structure, and language to operate. Division is not inherently ignorance, but psychological bondage is. One may function effectively within division while remaining inwardly rooted in wholeness, and that is awakened living. Conditioning remains functional, but bondage becomes optional. The world need not become perfect for freedom to exist, and peace need not depend upon ideal conditions. The relative world remains imperfect, yet wholeness remains possible. Human life begins in pure openness, but conditioning quickly constructs a framework through which reality is interpreted. Conditioning is an accumulated pattern built through memory, repetition, and emotional imprint. It operates through evolutionary programming, personal emotional habits, social definitions of success, and ideological concepts that shape our perception. Conditioning itself is necessary to speak language, drive a car, and navigate society. Bondage begins only when conditioning mistakenly becomes our identity. Bondage happens subtly when a thought or emotion appears and the mind claims it as me. Self-images form, and these identities become invisible prisons because they feel normal. The deepest conditioning is hardest to see because it functions as the lens through which we see everything. Realizing that our thoughts, beliefs, and reactions are conditioned can feel destabilizing. Freedom from conditioning does not mean the patterns completely disappear, but it means they no longer unconsciously define our identity. Among spiritual teachings, few are more misunderstood than karma, which is often reduced to simplistic moral accounting. Reality is far subtler, as karma is fundamentally about the law of causation. Every event arises from conditions, and nothing appears in isolation. A single event involves personal choices, inherited patterns, social forces, and unseen historical causes. The chain of causation becomes nearly infinite, meaning the human mind cannot fully comprehend or predict total causation. Because karma reveals a complexity far beyond personal prediction, egoic certainty is challenged. We are entitled to our actions, but not to the fruits of those actions, because the outcome belongs to the totality of variables. Effort remains meaningful, but control becomes realistic. Karma is not fatalism, it is intelligent realism. This understanding leads toward active surrender, allowing for wholehearted action without compulsive attachment to results. A direct confrontation with suffering shows that pain is inevitable, but suffering is constructed. The mind adds narratives of resistance, wondering why this is happening and insisting it should be different. Narrative amplifies and personalizes pain, which creates suffering. Awareness itself does not resist. It simply knows, illuminates, and witnesses, allowing the psychological imprisonment to soften. Investigating doership questions the center of personal agency. The sense of personal authorship feels obvious, yet the more carefully one examines action, the harder it becomes to locate an independent doer. Thoughts, memories, emotions, and desires emerge spontaneously in meditation, and the ego merely claims authorship afterward. Even our bodily processes happen through an extraordinary intelligence without a personal doer managing them. Life happens, and conscious identity narrates action rather than initiating it. Non-doership softens both pride and guilt without eliminating ethical responsibility. Actions still affect others, and ethics remain essential, but unnecessary psychological ownership dissolves. When the psychological maker weakens, awakened functioning begins. Life continues, and the burden of authorship decreases. This naturally opens the door to genuine surrender. The mind stops demanding impossible guarantees from the world, space opens up within us, and our clarity increases. True surrender cannot be selective. The mind often tries to negotiate, offering surrender only as long as events go its way. True surrender is tested in moments of difficulty, illness, loss, failure, and uncertainty. Acceptance does not mean passivity, it means clear seeing. Only clear seeing enables intelligent action, whereas denial delays response and resistance wastes energy. Surrender strengthens action by transforming us into an instrument through which life moves. Awakening cannot be reduced to a temporary mystical experience because all experiences change and belong to manifestation. Awakening concerns what does not come and go, representing the end of misidentification. Before awakening, identity centers around protecting the ego through memory, control, and resistance. Awakening interrupts this movement by recognizing that the separate self is not an entity, but a psychological process, shifting identity from the personal self to impersonal awareness. Awakening is the recognition that our deepest identity is not the changing content, but the field in which content appears. Externally, little changes. The body remains, responsibilities remain, bills still require payment, and emails still need answering. What transforms is our relationship to the world. Before awakening, experience defines identity. After awakening, experience appears within awareness. Phenomena arise and pass, but they no longer imprison our identity. In this context, emptiness is not nihilistic nothingness, but a living, spacious openness. This openness carries a quiet bliss, born of non-resistance and the end of the burden of becoming. Awakening is freedom from bondage to conditioning, not the elimination of it. Life after awakening does not transform into permanent external ecstasy. The world continues functioning according to its nature, but ordinary life is no longer burdened by unnecessary psychological friction. Before awakening, much of life is driven by the endless pursuit of future fulfillment. Awakening interrupts this structure by revealing that psychological completion cannot be found in future attainment. Existential fulfillment is no longer postponed, and presence becomes sufficient. Action becomes an expression of completeness rather than a compensation for deficiency. Functional responsibility remains, but psychological ownership softens, allowing our actions to become lighter and more spontaneous. When rigid self-identity softens, shared vulnerability becomes obvious, and compassion naturally expands. Conflict becomes less personalized, listening improves, and presence deepens. The extraordinary is discovered directly within the ordinary elements of life, such as breath, silence, tea, sunlight, and stillness. The seeking mind looks for extraordinary states, but awakening reveals the sacred in what already is, and that sufficiency brings deep peace. The problem was never life itself, but our misidentification with the conditioned self. Awakening is recognizing what has always been present, the awareness that knows all changing states. This recognition dissolves the psychological struggle because life rests in being rather than becoming. What you seek has never been absent. It has only been overlooked. The journey ends exactly where it began, with an awareness that is always present, silent, unchanging and whole.